conflict or appearance of conflict, please state so at this time. Okay, seeing none, Madam Council, we have quorum, just barely, but we do have quorum. Today, we have two information items before us, committee members. One is a follow-up from last committee meeting. We asked DWM for some additional information and discussion on the landfill PFAS data. And Michael, I guess Adam, doing the presentation. Adam, you want to come on forward? Adam, I jumped the gun. If you don't mind, let me ask for approval of any minutes. So we have the minutes before us. I've reviewed them. Hopefully the committee has as well. Does anybody have any comments or a motion for approval of the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Yarborough, motion approved. Do I have a second? Anybody want a second?
Okay, I'm making a second.
All right, Commissioner Yarborough seconds. All in favor, say aye.
We do look alike.
Oh, Commissioner Reardon, apologies. I need more caffeine. All right, motion passes to approve the minute. All right, Adam, sorry about that.
Good morning, Chair Baumgartner, committee members, Adam Ulishny, Deputy Director with Division of Waste Management. I'm going to brief presentation on solid waste landfill PFAS data. So brief overview, all landfill facilities are required to maintain a groundwater monitoring network. They're required to also sample that network on a semi-annual basis for a variety of constituents. All our landfills have sampled their groundwater monitoring networks for PFAS constituents and submitted groundwater monitoring reports to the division, which are uploaded to our online public-facing document system known as Laserfish. Landfill facilities have also submitted what's called an EQUIS data file. EQUIS stands for Environmental Quality Information System. It is a system widely used by states and EPA for data storage, data management, data analysis, and data reporting. This tool has been instrumental in managing the massive amounts of data we have associated with the Chemours facility, which you'll see in the next informational item. In our programs, we required them to submit EQUIS data files. The solid waste landfill facilities has been submitting those files for several years now. EPA method 1633 reports 40 PFAS constituents. Our query here, we focused on the 8 PFAS constituents shown on this slide that have a health-based inner maximum allowable concentration. Of note, you'll see underlined PFOA, PFOS, PFHXS, Gen X, and PFNA also have an EPA maximum contaminant level for drinking water. So for our system, we queried the lowest reported analytical result and the highest reported analytical result in any groundwater monitoring well network, regardless of sampling event, for each PFAS constituent with a health-based standard across all landfill facilities for which we have an EQUIS data file. And provided is attachment A. It's about 12 pages of the data. It's a compilation of the data that's organized where you can see the facility name, the permit identification number, the county it's located in, as well as the facility type, operational status, and construction type. It is important to note that as a disclaimer on here, you need to verify or validate the data with the actual analytical laboratory report. This does not have any of the data qualifiers, any of the quality assurance data information, or any of the quality control data information. So for discussion and illustration purposes, pictured on this slide is a closed, unlined municipal solid waste landfill in central North Carolina, closed industrial landfill in western North Carolina, and an active construction and demolition debris landfill in eastern North Carolina. So some high observations when looking at the data. The vast majority of groundwater at the landfill facilities exceed the 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. Less than 10% of landfill facilities have a Gen X concentration above the health-based value of 10 parts per trillion. For PFBA, all landfill facilities have reported groundwater concentrations in excess of the PQL, but no exceedances were of the 7,000 parts per trillion health-based value. And similarly for PFBS and PFHXA, the vast majority of landfill facilities reported those concentrations above the practical quantitation limit, but below the health-based standards of 2,000 and 4,000 respectively. So in closing, we've sent a notice of regulatory requirement letters to initial subset of 20 facilities. The letters require them to submit an updated receptor survey. Shown here on this slide is an example of such receptor survey. Those blue dots indicate private drinking water wells in the vicinity of the landfill. The next steps, the facilities are currently determining if private water well sampling is warranted. To date, we have 9 facilities that have determined it is, and we as a division are working on screening reports for a potential second subset of letters. And I'll be more than happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions of the commissioners? Committee members?
Question?
Yes, sir.
So
Commissioner Reader.
Adam, the monitoring wells that you're drawing these samples from, what's the depth of those wells? Is that surface water we're drawing? Is it an aquifer? What's the depth of the well monitoring wells?
They're in aquifers and it varies from shallow to intermediate to deep.
And what numbers would you put to that? Shallow, intermediate, and depth, deep?
Without looking at each individual facility, I wouldn't know the depths. They're in the analytical monitoring reports or the groundwater monitoring reports. You can find all the depths.
And these were adjacent to unlined landfills as well?
All landfill facilities, sir. So pictured on this slide is an example of a landfill facility, and all those blue dots represent the groundwater monitoring network associated with that facility. So those ground monitor wells were sampled for PFAS constituents, and those wells could vary in depth from shallow to intermediate to deep.
Is there, I'm assuming there's an effort purposely developed to develop the wells from shallow to deep. Is there an effort to look at different soil types as well throughout the network?
We have the soil types probably from the log borings when the groundwater monitoring wells were drilled, but our focus for this study was just on groundwater.
Groundwater and distance. Is that it?
Yes,
Groundwater and distance away.
groundwater, yeah, and
Depth
yeah,
and distance.
the horizontal extent and the vertical extent, yep.
Mr. Reader, do you have any more? Committee members, any more further questions? I had one question. I noticed a lot of these are Piedmonts and mountains. I know there's some in the coast. Is that just because this where the landfills are falling, or did y'all, is this a set of all the landfills across the state, or?
Yes, sir. It's a set of all the permitted landfills across the state.
Okay. All right. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the landfill industry, the permittees. They pulled together the funding, worked with their consultants to collect this data. Ultimately, DEQ did request the PFAS data for landfills. I consider it a very comprehensive data set when you think about our country and the amount of information North Carolina has on landfills, which are instrumental for the safe disposal of waste. But I also wanted to recognize colleagues. It is a massive data set. A lot of them are with us today in the committee meeting here, Mr. Chairman. They've worked diligently on pulling this data together, helping our agency really make informed decisions on next steps. As Adam discussed, the letters, the notices of regulatory requirement, where a subset of landfills need to look beyond their boundaries to make sure groundwater is not impacted or other receptors. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to acknowledge those different entities.
Thank you. And I thank you for staff pulling the information together. What, just one question, Director Scott, from the letters, what happens regulatory wise or enforcement wise from there? Do you continue to monitor out to see the limits of detection? What's going on after these letters go out? What's the subsequent follow-up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the letters, as Deputy Director Lishny mentioned, are notices that there's a regulatory requirement. That's the title of the letter under the commission's rules, meaning for groundwater. and that we've detected compounds that are in exceedance of those standards, meaning the 2L standards for groundwater, and that the facility needs to do additional sampling. In addition to sampling, if there's a receptor, the best example would be someone consuming water from a private drinking water well. If outside of the landfill property, the facility discovers someone's drinking impacted water, the facility is also being asked to address that through an alternate water approach. So those are some of the next steps, the main one being sampling and making sure there's no direct receptor impacts. Ultimately, per the 2L rules that the commission puts forth and the department follows, we'll move through the 2L process from assessment to looking at remedial options. If there's a way, obviously, any PFAS that may be leaving the site, that it can be stopped or cut off, that would be the next step after ample data is collected.
Thank you, Director Scott. Commissioner Lowry.
I just have one question. Obviously there's a range of values from some of these landfills. Some of them seem incredibly high. I think I saw Robeson County, Sampson County, Scotland, and everything. Is there an obvious reason? For example, were some of them sites in which a lot of PFAS manufacturing was known to be deposited there? Or is it just, completely random? People are dumbfounded that the levels are this high there? Or is there any thought as far as the outliers that have very high levels?
No, they may have taken products or waste that had high concentrations of PFAS or PFOA compared to other landfills. That's the only explanation I could provide.
So, but there's not known, as you would speculate, looking at the numbers, that the numbers are high enough that it suggests that there might be a source within the landfill that was.
I mean, it suggests that the landfill is probably the source.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of the committee? One last question, Adam. The regulatory letters. I'm sorry, might be reading the term. The regulatory letters that were sent out, how many of those were public versus private entities? Do you know?
I
do not off the top of my head. I will turn to anyone, colleagues would know that.
It was fairly close to 50-50. I think maybe there were 9 private. Maybe, again, I don't know the exact number, but of the 22 that went out, it's fairly close to being low.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, committee members? Commissioner,
One more question. Is there a correlation that there are higher numbers whether the landfill is not lined versus lined? And the reason I say that, I'm looking down here at New Hanover County being lined, but some of the numbers are significantly different than others. Is there a correlation between the lined and the unlined? I would suspect there might be, but.
No distinct correlation. You would expect an unlined landfill to have higher concentrations than a lined landfill, but there's factors you have to consider. So some groundwater monitoring networks may monitor not just the lined landfill, but also any active C&Ds or closed C&Ds that are unlined, or potentially a closed unlined landfill. So they're catching data from units, not just of a lined landfill. And you also have to consider leachate management practices, historic or past leachate releases that may have caused or contributed to the contamination we're seeing in the wells. So it's not really a great comparison because there's 2 or 3 factors to consider.
Okay, thank you.
any further questions? Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Director Scott, and staff for putting this information together. It was very helpful and very informative. All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item, also an information item. Update on private drinking water well sampling under the 2019 Camorra's consent order. As everyone knows, there's been a lot of activity under this consent order, and this is an update for a recent well sampling event that DEQ has put forward. And Jared Wilson. Thank you, Jared. You had the floor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you guys for having me. I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jared Wilson. I'm the environmental program analyst here at the department. I've been spearheading a lot of the work with the private well sampling and the drinking water compliance plan with Comores. So as you may know, in 2019, the department and Comores entered the consent order. One of the key points of this was that they were to sample private wells and provide drinking water where exceedances were to be found. I'm just going to use this slide because, from the facility, aerial emissions, have tracked, and we've seen an expansion of samples across the state. At this point now, it's expanded into over 10 counties where sampling is occurring. Why that's important is because North Carolina is the second highest state with residents on private drinking wells. 35% of North Carolina residents obtain their drinking water from private wells. That's a little over a third of the residents there. So at this point right now, we're 21,000 plus total samples have been collected across these counties. Total consent order exceedances are just about 44%. So attachment C, any attachment C, PFAS greater than or equal to 10 nanograms per liter, or some of those attachments C greater than or equal to 70 nanograms per liter, or Gen X specific greater than or equal to 10 nanograms per liter. There is a subset of those samples, approximately 10,000, just under, that have those the recent EPA MCLs that were announced. So we have approximately 10,000 wells that have that, and we see exceedances in those for just approximately 23%. So that's the backstory on the drinking water or on the groundwater sampling up to this point. Near the facility, over 10,000 private wells have been sampled around the facility, ranging 27.5 miles from the facility. This was done in a stepwise approach that's called the step out and infill method that Comores used. So in each of the individual sector miles, they would sample 10 homes. If an exceedance was found, then they would step out to the next mile. And if they didn't find one within those 10 homes, then they would sample 10 more confirmatory samples. To date, we have not found the edge of contamination. And I want to call to note that this was a map that was produced January of 2025 by one of their contractors. Just to kind of show you through time, this was a map that was produced June 2024, and the distance from the facility is approximately the same in terms of sampling, but yet you're still seeing exceedances at the edge of that area. Pretty similar shape at this point in 2022 as well. And so it gets to the hurdles of this sampling approach as you get farther and farther from the facility. Those step sizes increase. There's differences in the private well density. To the northwest, you're looking at Fayetteville, so a lot of homes are going to be connected to public water supply. So you're going to see a much fewer available residential wells to sample. Likewise, when you get into much more rural areas, there's just fewer homes to sample in a given sector mile. So there's a few hurdles, and because of that, this sampling approach became slower and much more incremental through time. And so to address this, we met with Comores because one of the issues that they want is they want to reach finality, and so do many homeowners, regarding the expanded area. That we want to identify just how far the contamination has spread. And so we worked together to develop two separate models. Model one is a introspective look. It's a geospatial model for the samples that have been collected within, extrapolated out 10% to identify, what the current sampling area looks like and where exceedances may be occurring within the current sampling area. We also used a linear approach to measure the rate of exceedance in each of the sector miles to identify where we would expect to see 0% based on that linear approach. And the culmination of the two is that we kind of went with a conservative approach and identified the furthest of the sector miles under the original framework of the one steps, and anywhere where either model projected the edge of contamination, we went ahead and expanded the boundary to that point. So that's the expansion to date around the facility. But models are informed by data. There's pretty significant area where we're going to just be collecting more samples, and this modeling approach is going to be reevaluated periodically to identify exactly where the edge will be. Also, in this same area, there's carryover from the 4-county assessment, the lower Cape Fear, that is Pender, Brunswick, New Hanover, and Columbus counties. They were doing hypothesis testing for the distribution there in those 4 counties. And one of the hypotheses that they found was supported was the floodplain hypothesis. So extended through Bladen County was a 55-mile stretch of the river. That is now included in part of this expansion as well. And just to kind of give you the numbers on this more than doubles the sampling area near the site. It's expected that more than 9,000 homes are going to be added to the eligibility list. That is homes that are on private well as their primary drinking source within that expanded boundary. To address this, Comores sent letters out to all 150,000 residences in the area, as well as through the floodplain area. That's an additional 800 homes, give or take, that they expect to be on private well. So sampling is ongoing in those areas. And it's going to continue through Bladen, Cumberland, Sampson, Robeson, Arnett, Hope counties for the near site work, as well as the lower four counties that I mentioned earlier. In terms of community outreach, DEQ has hosted a virtual town hall. This was done back on April 1st, but we are going to do an in-person community meeting. That meeting is still to be determined. And we're also discussing with county officials and local health departments to evaluate municipal water connections for homes in the impacted areas, and evaluating some methods to make the well testing information more accessible. That's creating more tools to make sure that homeowners have access to the information that they need to request sampling. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, committee members. Chair Solomon, you recognize.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and it may be for Mr. Scott too, either one of you, but this is a pretty large plume. We'll do a lot of natural attenuation cleanup. We don't see things move this widely. Now, there's factors like how much and the levels of contamination we're tracking. But how long has this been going on? Have y'all looked at that yet from the rate of spread and back into it? Because this doesn't just happen over a 5 or 10 year period. If it's 20, 50 miles, the plumes, you're tracking the plume 50 miles away. So how long would that have had to happen based on looking at other contaminants for this thing to move 55 miles? That sounds like a lot. In my first professional experience, it sounds like a lot. So have y'all thought about how long this has been going on? Cause that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Solomon. Great question. The short answer is the emission of some of these PFAS to the environment from the Bladen County site ultimately was over decades, I think is the answer to your question. It wasn't a short time frame, months or a year or two. It was more like over time, meaning decades, plural. And so what has occurred, as Jared laid out in the maps, is this conversation centered around the compound a lot of people refer to as Gen X or HFPO dimer acid, a replacement for PFOA. But as the discussion has furthered and you look at the consent order and the unique signature that the Comores facility has, meaning the PFAS that are associated with that facility, there are short chain compounds that have spread long distances through air emissions. And so one specific example is PMPA. So what has occurred is the air emissions from the plant that were uncontrolled from a PFAS perspective came down as wet rainwater, PFAS in the rainwater, or dry, the PFAS literally coming down as dry deposition, making their way through these sandy textured soils overall in this area and impacting groundwater, especially wells that are 100 foot less in depth. So
That's what I was gonna ask you. So
Yeah.
you've got some data. That's more than a theory. That's, you see it in shallow drinking water wells more than most residential well nows are several hundred feet deep. They're not
That's
80
right.
feet deep, but you see them in the shallower wells to think the air transportation.
That's correct. So we have wells that are documented that were hand dug. That means with a shovel,
Yeah.
15 feet, 1.5. And then we have wells that were drilled, meaning 300 foot into bedrock. And you can see that the data is very different. And I think that's the point you're alluding to.
Yeah, because
So-
is the plume shaped like that, kind of wider? Because my next question will be, how many miles you say you're tracking this now?
At the farthest, it's currently 35, I think. I
35?
would have to double check.
Did I hear you going to 55? Did I hear that right? You're going out 55 miles, or you will be?
55 miles is the river floodplain.
Okay, because my next question would be, I understand that cone being wider at the top and that shallow, non-confined zone, but down in confined wells, I would think it to be narrower. But how many plumes do you have in North Carolina that are 35 miles wide?
One.
One, this one, right?
One.
One. So this is a record in North Carolina for and that's maybe a function of how far you've tracked but you've tracked other plumes out there to the edges.
Yeah, we have. I mean, you have petroleum constituents that say close to a gas station, right? Then you have chlorinated solvents, you have your sinkers and your plumes that move potentially hundreds of yards, or you may be in the mile discussion, but very few. When you get into this realm, it's one. And as Jared showed with the floodplain illustration and the river, unfortunately, as a transport mechanism for the PFAS to the lower Cape Fear region, it's essentially from Harnett County to New Hanover, if you follow the river.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. It's good.
A question I have, and you touched on it, Director Scott, how do you know, expand on it a little bit more, how do you know that this particular PFAS compound is coming from the plant versus other PFAS compounds that may be used in well construction or materials, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with the development of the consent order in 2019, we talk a lot in 2025 about fingerprints, and where PFAS come from is like a fingerprint. And this facility has a unique fingerprint that was agreed upon with the facility as part of the consent order. So when you read that legal document, the attachments, appendices at the back of the document basically lay out that fingerprint. The one we're referring to is attachment C, which is the fingerprint or the makeup of the PFAS that are only tied to this one facility in groundwater. And that was established collectively as part of the negotiated consent order.
And you're seeing consistency in well construction and soil type with detection, I'm assuming?
Yeah, and Jared may want to weigh in here too, but I think one key point we've discussed is well depth. Some folks are drilling bedrock wells, which we're familiar with that term. It's generally upper coastal plain, I would say, blading into Harnett, river areas. You got sandy textured soils. Obviously, increasing organic matter can help to bind PFAS, but these are not the black lands of North Carolina, right? So the PFAS is moving through that sandy soil profile into groundwater. There are differences in well construction. A new well properly grouted versus hand dug wells, you get the point. If that's an older well that's 80 feet deep versus a brand new well that's 100 foot deep, maybe that new well is not impacted. But ultimately, the proven hypothesis is through the air deposition, soils were impacted and the PFAS made their way through to the groundwater.
I guess those contaminants are not just isolated for PFAS and this particular situation, those wells not, or dug by hand, not by today's standards, a lot of them may have even other contaminants that they're dealing with as well. Just.
Yeah.
for the
Yeah,
way
fair
that this is
point. There
getting
can
in.
be other bacteriological or other contaminants depending on that well construction. Fair point. Yeah.
Committee members, any other questions, comments? I noticed, Jared, the model leans heavily to the northeast. Is that, I'm assuming that's the prevailing winds
So
thing in the model, or is-
that is one of the assumptions with the modeling approach is that there is the prevailing wind direction, so to the northeast and to the southwest. But that's also where the larger quantity of homes that are on private wells exist in the area. Once you get into Robeson County, you see they have a pretty robust public water supply. And then you get through southeast through Bladen County, then there's just, fewer residential homes along the Cape Fear River. You get into Cumberland County, and once you hit Fayetteville, there's a pretty, sizable, the city itself has its own public water supply there. So when you get into the, like up towards Sampson County, that area, that's just where most of the homes in this model, exist. So that's where we're getting that's where most of our data is coming from.
Gotcha. Okay. Good deal. Any further questions? Thank you, Jared, Director Scott, sorry. For that information, very good updates. Director Scott, do you want to provide update on upcoming items?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Out of this committee, we do have one item before the full commission tomorrow, the request for approval of the schedule for readoption as part of the periodic review of existing rules. Those would be the O2S dry cleaning rules. Jessica will present that tomorrow. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further remarks, Director Scott?
Now it's time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't see Director Rogers anywhere. So I guess he has no remarks. So that being said, there are commission members, any other topics of discussion for this committee? All right, we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.